A friend of mine asked about a month ago for my thoughts on the Black Lives Matter movement. Truthfully, ever since George Floyd's death, I've been hesitant to speak up. I've been trying to work on a comic to explain my thoughts on this movement. I've tried to write a paper as well, but my search for a perfect thesis or a perfect video to put together is going to take way too long. So I decided to type out my thoughts, put them on paper, and read them out. These issues I don't think are going to stop, and they're in our face right now. I don't have the time or energy to put something together that's perfect or well organized. And ultimately, I'll return to this thought in the end how no type of such social correction needs to be perfect. But I'll return to this topic later. Let's start with 2012. In 2012, Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman. For myself and other black millennials, Trayvon Martin was our Rodney King. Embarrassingly enough, I didn't know about Rodney King and the riots that followed after he was beaten by police until well into my high school years. However, I remember Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was the same age as myself when he died, and because of this, his death became very personal. I never thought that racism was entirely eradicated from our country growing up, yet this killing suddenly made me very aware how serious a problem it still was. My family and I had some very real conversations as a result of this killing. One thing I distinctly remember was my brother and I had a conversation with my father. He told us the reason he used corporal punishment on my brother was because if he did not teach him respect that way, it might lead to him being killed by cops. I know that I was not the only young black person who had this experience, and for this reason, I think that his death made it easier for young black folks to support Black Lives Matter as it grew in popularity later on. All in all, though, Trayvon Martin's killing, at least in my memory, was not nearly as tumultuous as what would follow. Sure, President Obama managed to evoke ire when he stated that if he had a son, he would look like Trayvon Martin. Him and others also got flack for saying that Him and others also got flack for saying that there is systemic racism in the police force. But this anger was nothing compared to the fallout after the killing of Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. Ferguson, Missouri is not like Sanford, Florida. Sanford is the town where Trayvon Martin was killed. Ferguson is far poorer and has more violence. So when this young man was killed, the protests were not nice. They became violent. The coverage of these protests on social media led to me discovering Black Lives Matter for the first time, specifically on Tumblr. I soon followed suit and began tagging my posts with the phrase. Something about it really clicked for me. I realized the phrase itself was something of an affirmation that us young black folks wanted to hear. I am worthy of something it seemed to say. I deserve fair treatment like anyone else. These were the thoughts that we were trying to have heard, and it was all summed up very well in one powerful phrase. Since I did not hear about the phrase until I was following Mike Brown's death on social media and on the news, I always thought it had come about during these protests and because of them. However, it was actually founded a year earlier according to the Black Lives Matter website. It was a hashtag that was started in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer. I believe the hashtag was not really popularized and made known to the broader world until Mike Brown's death. While I and other black youth enjoyed this phrase, it was highly controversial at this time, somewhat more so than it is right now. It did not have the same support as it does now from celebrities and other figures. The phrase All Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matters came up as a response to it and were used far more commonly. Truthfully, it made me feel bad. For the longest time, I couldn't voice what Black Lives Matter was truly saying and made me ashamed to even say the phrase outside of my family. The following years after Ferguson saw many other shootings of black individuals. Tamir Rice was a 12-year-old boy who was killed in 2014. In a frighteningly similar way to George Floyd, Eric Garner was killed by a chokehold by a police officer in New York in 2015 for selling cigarettes. Walter Scott was shot in the back and killed in 2015. Freddie Gray died suspiciously after having his sign nearly severed in the back of a police car in 2015. In 2016, Philando Castile and Arton Sterling died, adding to the long list of police brutality and mishandling of traffic stops. The list goes on, and truthfully, there are many unreported killings and assaults that have happened since then. And now, in 2020, the phrase has come back into the limelight. Thankfully, there are more people who can understand it better. However, Black Lives Matter has three issues that make it hard to be viewed in the same way as other civil rights movements of the past. A lot of these points are related, but I'll try to keep them as distinct as possible. The first, and I think one of the biggest obstacles there is to this, is that there's a misunderstanding of what the phrase Black Lives Matter means. It took me 6 years to find an anecdote that made sense for explaining the phrase Black Lives Matter. Once I found it, though, I knew that it was something that would help the most rational people understand it better. This will draw off of a comic that I will link in the strict description of this video, so please go and read it, since I didn't come up with it on my own. So I hope by reading it and listening to my description, you have a better understanding and at least get a better perspective on what Black Lives Matter means to Black folks and how certain phrases and reactions to this term seem to detract from the argument. There's a house that is on fire in a neighborhood. As people rush to put out the flames of the house, some people are upset that this house is getting more attention than the homes that are not on fire. So they begin to chant, "All houses matter." One woman shouts, "My house has mold. Shouldn't it be fixed too?" The others agree with her, but tell her the fire is more pressing than the mold. Another man shouts, "What if my house catches on fire after this one? Shouldn't I have the right to the water too?" The others agree with him, but remind him that his house is not on fire. As they continue to bicker and fight, the residents in the home that is on fire perish. Now, while this metaphor may seem a bit over the top, I think it is necessary to understanding why Black folks are tired of this movement being misinterpreted and misrepresented. I think that the people in the analogy focusing on things outside of the larger problem in front of them points out how many Black people are frustrated with the what-abouts and what-ifs that are often brought up and used to silence Black folks' opinions whenever Black Lives Matter is discussed. And the next problem is one that is more targeted at the structure of Black Lives Matter rather than its ideology. The movement is a younger one that is largely based on social media. So, not many people are aware that it is an official movement with chapters around the world, or at least I myself was not aware of this until much later. There also is not nearly the same base in the church as the civil rights movement. You had the NAACP, or the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who the late John Lewis was a part of, the Southern Christian Leadership Council, and others like it. I believe that this was one of the things that somewhat helped the civil rights movement at the time. There are also leaders that those in the media could easily point out to be associated with the movement, such as Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis, and Rosa Parks. While these people are really important and I do look up to them, this is not to say that Black Lives Matter does not have similar people who are representing it. I'd like to draw your attention to Reverend T. Sherry Dickerson of the Oklahoma City Black Lives Matter chapter. I will go ahead and link a video that was made at the end of June in which she was trying to protest the fact that some of the protesters were arrested and are being charged by the Oklahoma DA. Now, I first learned about Reverend Sherry T. Dickerson when I was watching the protests going on in Oklahoma City. There was a somewhat hectic situation amongst a mostly peaceful protest earlier in June, but this well-spoken woman was able to calm down protesters and show a very strong arm of leadership. Now, the contents of the video that I will post are up for debate. Reverend Dickerson states that damaging police vehicles is not terrorism, which I don't personally agree with, but a discussion of violence and terrorism and how it is used to move the wheels of history is something I would like to visit later. But as for my thoughts right now, I don't agree that just damaging police vehicles is not an act of terrorism. However, I'm digressing. The point is that she's a very good example of others that I would love to be representative of the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, the third and final point leads down to the slippery slope of militancy, and Black Lives Matter is very often associated with militancy. I want to bring up something that occurred 3 years ago that came about as a popularization of the hashtag Black Lives Matter. In 2017, a hate crime was committed against a white teenager with special needs. He was kidnapped and tortured by a group of 4 black people. I believe due to safety concerns, the name of the teenager was never released, which, when you consider what occurred to him, it is highly understandable. The teenager was tied up for 4 to 5 hours and his torture was live streamed on Facebook. Now, why do I bring this up in a discussion about Black Lives Matter? The reason being is that the teen's kidnappers shouted Black Lives Matter, amongst other things like fuck Donald Trump and fuck white people. A crime was referenced on social media as the BLM kidnapping or the Black Lives Matter kidnapping. However, I must point out that there was no tangible connection between the hate crime and Black Lives Matter. The scene that was displayed on Facebook Live was a scene of torture and was despicable, cruel, and racist. But to say that just because these people said Black Lives Matter when they attacked him is like saying that every person who supports Donald Trump is a racist. I personally do not believe this, but it goes to show that the incident soured and tarnished Black Lives Matter's reputation for many, no matter what the police were able to figure out with connection between Black Lives Matter, the organization, and these people who tortured this teenager. Now, even though these points are often all alluded to, or at least one of them is alluded to when speaking about Black Lives Matter, I think sometimes these criticisms are seeing the forest for the trees. Keep in mind that the Black Lives Matter movement is a large one and is not nearly as centralized as the groups that participated in the civil rights movement. So there are often going to be times where red herrings will come about in the Black Lives Matter movement because it is rooted in social media. It did start off as a hashtag after all. However, to deem everyone who uses this phrase as a terrorist, a thug, or a criminal is not a fair assessment. When looking at the heart of Black Lives Matter, it's frustrating when bad faith actors are given more attention, such as rioters and protesters who are violent, rather than the people who are tirelessly working to promote change. It is exhausting when rioting and looting in some cities is given more attention than the people who have gone out to promote peace. The narrative has been muddied, in my opinion. I disagree with a lot of points when it comes to conservative views and everything, but one thing that I think we both can agree on is that sometimes the media twists the messages of people who are trying to fight for what's right. Wouldn't it be better to ask your Black friends, and sometimes they're your family members, ask them why they think the way they do and what Black Lives Matter really means to them. Perhaps by opening that dialogue in a genuine way, you can better understand what they are talking about and not rely on what is shown on television about the group. I'm not saying that Black Lives Matter should be immune from criticism. However, the criticisms I have seen have rarely gotten past these 3 points. I want to leave on a point I think is important. Huey P. Newton, one of the founders of the original Black Panther Party, said it was important to appeal to poor, not well-educated Black folks or the brothers of the block and give them a voice. As Martin Luther King Jr. himself, the father of modern nonviolent protest, said, "A riot is the language of the unheard." This is not to say riots are correct or even the best response to the police brutality, but this messy, horrible, and sometimes costly form of protest needs to be heard and not simply dismissed. In order to stop it, laws and tangible change need to occur. And unfortunately, if these things do not stop, riots will continue. We saw them in 1968 after Martin Luther King's death. We saw them in 1992 in Los Angeles after Rodney King was beaten by several cops. There were riots in 2014 after Mike Brown's death, and there were riots in Charlottesville in 2015 after Freddie Gray's death. Now we are seeing the same things again in 2020 with the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Hopefully, though, with organizations like Black Lives Matter and leaders like Reverend T. Dickerson and the work of peaceful protest, we can put an effective dent into the systemic racism that is entrenched in our police system. Before I finish off this video, I also want to take time to thank some incredible people in my life for encouraging me to do this. First and foremost, my husband. His passion, research, and dedication when it comes to Black Lives Matter is astounding. It really speaks to his love for me and what I care about. Couples don't agree on everything, but the fact that he's a white man supporting me in this area of my life really is something I really appreciate. I truthfully wanted to run and hide from this topic, but he was one of the first ones who made me realize I have to talk about this. Next, my friend Billy Rodriguez. I know he probably thought this would be shorter and simpler, but really, he was the crack that opened the dam. He's been one of the few people from my high school days I can still talk to and have fun with. I love him so much for helping me with this. There are others who gave me support as well, but I know you would prefer to be anonymous for different reasons. You know who you are, and I appreciate you. Finally, I want to thank the people who took the time to watch this video or listen to this recording until the end. Even if you don't agree 100% with what I say, I appreciate that you at least took the time to listen to what I had to say. Thank you.